whether it be truth, whether it be non-violence, whether it be Sarvodaya, all the things. Because Gandhi ideologies basically rest on the human principles, humanity. The humankind is supreme. And if you do anything against humanity, it is not compromising. It is just not excusable. So that is what I personally believe that Gandhi ideas rest on. Since he believed in morality, so he tested everything on this yardstick of morality. As you already know that he launched a potent instrument of truth and non-violence. And these truth and non-violence also emanate from morality. And so these instruments became very potent source, very potent tools for ameliorating the conditions of the depressed, of the women, all the segments of the society which are downtrodden and depressed, which have been deprived of their rights and privileges. So what Gandhi feel is that every person is equal. Every person is equal. No person is higher and no person is lower. So on this basic yardstick, he tested his ideals. And as we all know that Gandhi was a practical man. Whatever he said, whatever he done was based on his practice. Because what he used to preach, he used to practice. Because what happens is, we used to tell a lot of things, but we don't practice in our daily life. And that jeopardizes our condition and situation. And that really is a trauma because there's a whole lot of things available. Where we say a number of things, but we just divulge when it comes to practice. So Gandhi was a real man who does not follow a doctrinaire approach and not any utopian model. So what he believed, what he said, that whatever he uttered, it was followed by him very strictly, very vehemently, and he was uncompromising man in that way. I think Gandhi, for Gandhi, it was truth. And as he used to say, that Gandhi, truth is, God is truth. But then he said that truth is God. So for that, since morality is concerned, truth is everything. Truth is God. So truth and non-violence, these became his basic tools. And what I had said earlier, that his means justifies his ends. So he, as believer of good ideals, good means, and good ends. That is not the way that we have to achieve independence by any sort of means. But these means has to be based on the test of morality and humanism. That is the more important thing. So in each and every movement, in each and every program that he launched, it was at the crux of his mind that we have to prove morality and humanity. That was the basic ideal behind his ideology and philosophy. Friends, Gandhi, as everybody knows, that Sarvodaya was a kind of potent instrument that he communicated to the lowest rung of the society. That everybody, every person should get the benefits what the humanity is to offer. So that is why his economic principles adjust whether capitalist or there will be poor persons. But he was to say that capitalist money should be utilized for the larger interest, for the benefit of the poor, for the common masses. Because, but that doesn't mean that capitalists have no rights to stay in the country. They have equal rights, but they are not supposed to gather such a sort of money that our poor get affected out of it. So he believed that since our means justifies our ends, so we should that sort of money which is used for the benefit of masses. So capitalist money is also to be distributed among the people so that major chunk of the population can reap benefits out of it. That is why this Sarvodaya became very popular. And since he was a man of humanism, I'm again stressing on this point. So each and every aspect of his, because his ideology was man-centric, human-centric. And that is why, since he knew that humanity and humankind and the people of village, people lie in village, the biggest population live in villages. So that is why his approach was village-centric, because we need to provide benefits to the maximum major portion of our population. And he practiced this in South Africa. He practiced the same approach in India too, because in South Africa he had seen the indiscrimination and injustice perpetrated on the Indians by the Britishers. He was dead against this, and so he just launched a massive approach, massive campaign against this mighty British regime, which was against oppression. So he was of the conviction that any form of exploitation, whether it be thoughts, words, or deeds, is not compromising. Because if anybody exploits the other, it is just inhuman attitude. So in this way, Gandhian approach in South Africa was against this attitude of the mighty British Empire, and that forced the British regime to kneel down. And same was happened in India. Now you see that Gandhi was the person who just got his ideas from Vedas, from Quran, from Confucianism, from Jainism, from Buddhism. So everything we can understand that he derived all these ideas from number of sources. So that makes him a great man, because he was an eclectic personality, eclectic persona. That is why he derived so much thoughts, so much things for the benefit of society and humanity and humankind. He was very influenced by John Ruskin's Unto the Last. And he was also influenced by Tolstoy. So he also imbibed his philosophy. So these make him a person with a practical approach, not any doctrinal approach, which could be possible in the real time. So these things make him a saint-like structure. But again, friends, I'm telling that we need not defy him. We need to test them on the basis of time, on the grounds of time. So that will make him a Gandhian approach more successful, more potent in the current period. As we all know, that pandemic is on the way. So these approaches are become more relevant now. But again, as I say, that since he was a man of moral science and morality, ethical values, he was against oppression, he was against exploitation, he was against injustice perpetrated on a single individual. Every individual must get due benefit what God has given to the people, what nature has provided to the people. The people should derive the most of it. Nobody could be deprived of this. So on this basic tenet and dogma, Gandhi advocated his philosophy, his ideologies, which become very relevant for the time being. And friends, as we all know that humanity is one factor that cannot be destroyed, that cannot be tarnished, that cannot be diminished by the test of time. Whatever be the time, whether violent time comes, whether we at war, whatever it's, but the single principle that will remain everlasting is humanity. His humanity is ever here, it will everlasting, and is always to survive here. So on that tenet, on that principle, I think Gandhi becomes more relevant, more adorable. His thoughts becomes more relevant with the test of the time. So in these perspectives, we had launched this webinar at Intrnational Fora so that our dignitaries, our experts deliberate on these principles and inculcate us with their thoughts, with their words, with the blessing of words. I think with these words, I welcome you all the dignitaries present over here and all the experts who had joined us. I humbly welcome all of you with these words. Thank you very much. Dr. Pankaj, Karna ma'am has joined?
Yeah. She has joined. Yes.
Okay. She's on the line now?
Yeah, she's online. Yeah.
Okay. Karuna ma'am, this is a very good
Very
evening.
good.
Very good evening, Karuna ma'am. I suppose
Yes.
it must be morning in USA.
The sun is trying to rise.
Okay. So we gave you a lot of problems, and you have to be online. So in the morning itself, on behalf of entire faculty team of the Department of History of Dr. Harishing Gaur Vishwavidyalaya Sagar, ma'am, extends a very warm welcome to you. That you acceded to our request. You just gave your permission to bless us with your words, with the words of wisdom. It is a very great experience, and we look forward to your wonderful lecture ahead. But before that, ma'am, I would like to read out just a brief resume of yours for the benefit of our audience. Please permit me to do so. Friends, Srimati Karuna began her service and dedication to both Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Foundation and the Self-Revelation Church of Absolute Monium in 1998. Both were founded by Swami Paramanand of India, who came to America in 1928. She became the director of Gandhi Memorial Center in 2006 and has devoted herself to presenting the ideals and life messages of Mahatma Gandhi and the spiritual and cultural heritage of India. She also conducts regular services in the Self-Revelation Church of Absolute Monism. The church follows the spiritual tradition of Swami Sankaracharya, Advaita Vedanta, with a totally non-sectarian philosophy. She studied at American University in Washington, D.C., where she received her BA in International Studies, MA in International Peace and Conflict Resolution, and MA in Teaching. Throughout the year, she speaks at universities, schools, governmental and non-governmental organizations, as well as for various professional, social, and religious groups that visit the Gandhi Memorial Center. In 2010, she was invited to India under the Indian Council for Cultural Relations Distinguished Visitor Program. So with these words, ma'am, I wholeheartedly welcome you for a wonderful presentation ahead. Please go ahead. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Welcome, Madam Karuna. I am Dr. Pankaj Singh, the convener of this program, and most welcome to India on the behalf of our Department of History, Dr. Harishing Gaur Vishwavidyalaya, and all the participants and all my fellow friends and Professor B.K. Srivastava, the head of the department. I welcome you. And it is a privilege, and we feel honored that you have accepted our invitation to deliver your valuable lecture on great soul Mahatma Gandhi. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. And I am just welcoming you again. Please continue.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Singh. Thank you, Dr. Barolia. And I see Dr. Frank Daunt is also here with us from Taiwan, and I offer my pranam to you and to all of your university. It is certainly an honor to join you, I would say for you all this evening, but from my standpoint this morning. You might see behind me is a beautiful statue of Gandhiji at the Charka. I am speaking to you today from the Gandhi Memorial Center in Washington, D.C. And unlike the rest of your webinar speakers, I will humbly state that I am not a professor, I am not a scholar, but I do have the interest and desire to share with you a message of the Mahatma in a personal way. And I was thinking of this very idea of revisiting Gandhian thoughts in 21st century. We ourselves are all in the 21st century. Whatever pursuit of study, of the philosophy, of the idealism, of the message of the Mahatma, we are relevant. And what we have to think and to pursue and to practice is eternally relevant. In fact, I would like to state that those of you who are professors and students of history, I believe many of you are from the history department. Remember that Gandhiji is not just for us to study as students of history, but as students of the eternal. And to give you perhaps just a little introduction, because perhaps none of you or some of you have ever visited Washington, D.C., our Gandhi Memorial Center, as Dr. Barolia introduced, goes back many decades. As he mentioned, Swami Premananda Giri, who actually came from Bengal, from India in 1928 to settle in Washington, D.C. And like the rest of the world, Swami Premananda witnessed the life and activity and work of Mahatma Gandhi from afar. And he had in his heart the desire to bring Gandhi's message to America. And though he came initially at the request of his guru, Swami Yogananda Paramahansa, he wanted, of course, to present the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta, which, remember, Gandhiji himself said, I am an Advaitist. I believe in the absolute oneness of life. That already is a foundation for his whole premise of ahimsa and satya, of course. And Swami Premananda in 1959 established the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial Foundation here in Washington, D.C. At that time, it was just an idea, and it beginning to collect this beautiful library behind me that you see, books by and about Mahatma Gandhi, many of which today are out of print even in India, including the original copies of Young India and Harijan newspapers. Many students and scholars, such as yourselves, from the Washington, D.C. area come to the Gandhi Center Library for their own personal study. And then in 1976, it became possible to build this building. So this Gandhi Memorial Center has been here for 44 years, presenting the philosophy and message of Mahatma Gandhi, and also the cultural and spiritual heritage of India, which nourished him. Now, you're probably wondering, how did someone like me come to be such an dedicated part of this Gandhi Memorial Center? As you heard, I studied at American University in Washington, D.C., with an interest in international relations, in history, in culture, in philosophy, in world religions. And I had the opportunity as a graduate student to study international peace and conflict resolution. And I will tell you how I came to know about Gandhi's life and philosophy. You would think that someone studying peace studies would automatically learn of Gandhiji's contributions to conflict resolution, to peace building, to nonviolence. But that is not how I was introduced to Gandhiji. I, as I mentioned, had a tremendous interest in philosophy and world religion, in culture and language and literature. And in fact, my pursuit of Gandhiji started with a study of Islam. I was in a class on Islamic sources for peace and conflict resolution. And after studying in that class, where we looked at the Sunnah and the Hadith in the Quran for elements of conflict resolution and peace building, sources for conflict resolution, I decided to pursue a study of another tradition to look for similar sources for peace and conflict resolution. And I turned to the Bhagavad Gita. And during my study of the Bhagavad Gita, I came to know of this library here in the Gandhi Memorial Center. And not being a scholar or student of Sanskrit, of course, I was dependent on the various translations of the Gita. And poring over books you see in this library, weekend after weekend as a graduate student, looking at all the various interpretations and translations of the Bhagavad Gita in terms of its religious value, its societal contributions to its cultural value, philosophical and moral value. It was through the Gita that I was introduced to Mahatma Gandhi. For most of you will know that he had his own translation of the Bhagavad Gita as the gospel of selfless service. And looking to the very dialogue of Arjuna and Krishna, Gandhiji, I believe, drew very deeply the ideal of selfless service, of renunciation, of non-attachment to action, non-attachment to the fruits of one's actions, and perhaps in my own study, understanding a little bit more personally and deeply what that means in terms of ahimsa and satya, is that one cannot be nonviolent if one is attached to the results of one's actions. And so therefore the means and ends, the incontrovertible terms of means and ends, which Gandhiji so frequently spoke of, began to sit with me more deeply each moment, each day, each time I would read from Gandhiji's own translation of the Gita. And as Dr. Barolia described all of the tremendous influences in Mahatma Gandhi's life, above all, if we are trying to seek that which is relevant, we have to seek what Gandhi sought. We don't have to be Gandhi. We have to seek what he sought. And what did he seek at all points in his life? But truth. And the very idea of his entitling his autobiography, My Experiments with Truth, means just that. And that is what we have to take upon ourselves, to always, always experiment with our ideals, with perfecting the ideal of truth within ourselves, with how we live up to it, how we practice it, how we understand it in all circumstances, regardless. Remember the very expression from Krishna in the Gita that we should, under all circumstances, treat heat and cold alike, pleasure and pain, sorrow and joy, to find that equilibrium and balance in life, that we become undisturbed by all of the changing conditions of life. Now that sounds very idealistic and very difficult. And why would we want to do that which is easy? Our life already is such a, as Gandhiji said, razor's edge, quoting from the Upanishads, that this path to truth, to self-perfection, is a sharp and narrow path. And Gandhiji said, when I fall from this path, I weep, but I get back up on this path and continue. That is our life, from beginning to end, from birth to death. Why should we expect it to be easy? What we should expect is that every pursuit of truth guides us. We may feel overwhelmed with the circumstances of our global situation today, but we are given the power and the potential to overcome all of these obstacles. And I think that perhaps my interest in Mahatma Gandhi is to pursue a life that brings me closer to the ideal that I strive for. And of course, Gandhiji was a human being. We are all human beings. We all struggle. We all fall from that path, that razor's edge. And yet we will be able to get back on that path. The very, I would say, distinguished scholars, which you have been listening to this past night, night on my time, day for you, I know that they all give you a little bit of food for thought. And as students of history, that is what we continually seek. But as I said in the beginning, we don't merely want to be students of history. We want to be students of the eternal, of the universal. Now, when I was a graduate student and I came to the Gandhi Memorial Center, I had very little knowledge of Gandhiji. In fact, I'm sure all of you have read a great deal more and studied a great deal more of the life of the Mahatma. And perhaps you've pored over the collection of writings of the hundred volumes, collected volumes of Mahatma Gandhi's writings. For me, my pursuit of Gandhiji, sometimes those small little pamphlets which he published, many of them through Navajivan Press, give each reader a little note. And you perhaps have noticed that Gandhiji wrote at the beginning of his publications, "Dear reader, if you have read before what I have written on this subject and find within this new publication any inconsistencies, please disregard what I have written before, because I have since changed my mind." Now, perhaps we don't always want our politicians to be, changing their mind mid-course, but Gandhiji was an eternal student and always experimenting with truth, always learning a more fruitful path to journey. And I think that is something that we hold as an example, that we do not have all the answers, but we strive for truth. And the very message that Dr. Barolia gave, Gandhiji himself at least was humble enough to say that truth and nonviolence are as old as the hills. I have nothing new to teach. I don't know how many professors will say that as they get ready to speak before their students, that I have nothing new to teach, that these ideas are as old as the hills. And yet, we know that that which is worthwhile is eternal and universal. So I'm very pleased to join you today, and I do hope that if any of you in the future, when travel is safe and possible, that you would be able to come to Washington, D.C. and visit our Gandhi Memorial Center. In fact, we just had a very unusual but normal for the circumstances during this time to present our Gandhi Jayanti observance online, which is perhaps not as enjoyable as doing it in person, but we had a very beautiful observance for the 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. And just to give you a little idea of how our observance has taken place over these last 45 years, we would always light a diya, one for each year since the birth of the Mahatma, around the reflecting pool in front of our Golden Lotus Temple. And this year, as people were not able to come in person and gather in a large gathering, we had them bring, just to send us a little video of themselves lighting a lamp or a candle or a diya, and then putting those together with prayers recited and chanted from 7 different religious traditions, as Gandhiji would have in his ashram prayer meetings. And in fact, it was of interest to me to look back at Gandhiji's ashram observances and to learn that, in fact, at one point, after he had settled at Sevagram Ashram in Wardha in India, he had several Japanese Buddhist monks who came and stayed at the ashram and would offer a Buddhist mantra each day during the ashram prayer meetings. And after, of course, this going into World War II, after one of the Japanese monks who had been present in the ashram had to leave under the circumstances of World War II, Gandhiji decided to make that Japanese prayer, Buddhist mantra, as the very first of the prayers offered during the ashram prayer meetings. So for our Gandhi Jayanti observance, we followed with that example and began with this very beautiful mantra offered by a Japanese Buddhist couple here in Washington, D.C., followed by the Al-Fatiha of the Quran, of the Briharandaranyaka Upanishad, of the prayers from the Sermon on the Mount, from the Bible, the Christian tradition, the Sikh prayers, the Zoroastrian or Parsi prayers, and the Jewish faith. And bringing all of these together may sound quite common to have, for example, in many places around the world, an interfaith gathering. And yet, remember that Mahatma Gandhi every morning and every evening began and ended the day with these prayer meetings. And we might think perhaps that sounds ultra religious, or we might think he was trying to bridge people of different faiths and different traditions who were residing in the ashram. But it also sets an example and a tone that there was something sublime to begin the day and to end the day, and that it was shared. And so each of these traditions and practices, perhaps if you study anything about Mahatma Gandhi, if you study anything at all, of course, there are political, economic, social, cultural, all the elements of his life, which he pursued so thoughtfully and experimented with. But if you would only study one aspect of his life, study the ashram observances and those practices with which the daily life in his ashrams, Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad and Sevagram Ashram at Wardha, perhaps even looking to the Tolstoy farm and Phoenix settlement in South Africa. Those were the early experiences of ashram living for Gandhiji and those with him, but studied even just the day-to-day routine and practical approach that Gandhiji took in the ashram life and what it means to us today. We might think we're in this global, technologically advanced society and life, and yet simplicity of living is the ideal which Gandhiji presented above and beyond all of the other aspects of his life, that no matter how he dressed, as simply as could be, his speech as simple as could be, and his ideal as simple as could be. Those aspects of the simplicity of living really, in a way, became for Gandhiji the art of living. And for Mahatma Gandhi today, we're trying to say what is relevant and what do we find ourselves facing today? A pandemic and climate crises, all of the challenges politically, economically, socially, physically that we find, if we have in our hearts and minds a commitment and dedication to simplicity in whatever shape it will take. In our lives, it's going to vary. It's not going to look, as they say, there are many paths to the top of the mountain. But we have to have that highest ideal with us and within us. And I think that's where, for me, everyone's going to see something different from Gandhiji's life. And you've heard from many speakers over the course of this webinar, and you'll hear also from Dr. Frank Dont, who is going to also share with you his insights and knowledge of the life of Mahatma Gandhi. But for each and every one of you, I just urge you to study the life of those great souls who influenced you and your society and find a path for yourself. And I perhaps am not in a scholarly way presenting to you the history of Gandhiji or of any global affairs, but I have a personal desire to share the idealism that Gandhiji sought to share with his life. And I offer my pranams to each and every one of you. And I hope I have enticed you at some point to come and visit us in Washington, D.C. And I hope one day that I shall travel to Sagar, Madhya Pradesh, and to visit each and every one of you at your university. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karna ma'am. It's been wonderful. And we all invite you, please come at Sagar so that we can derive the benefits and the learnings from you. Just told that I have nothing new to say and teach, but I say that you teach us a lot because the way you are so humble in your approach, that itself tells that you are a true reflector of Gandhian ideals. So, ma'am, it was wonderful listening to you, and you taught a lot, again, a very Gandhian human value. Thank you, ma'am, so much for your analysis about Gandhiji. Ma'am, we salute to your turnaround towards Gandhi. It was just awesome. In your lecture, ma'am, you said that every pursuit of truth guides us, that pursues us to overcome the obstacles. Gandhi was always experimenting with truth. If we have dedication and simplicity in mind, anything within and without, we will be following Gandhi. So, ma'am, thank you so much for sharing your experiences in America regarding Gandhi's ideologies, and you are so dynamic in preaching all these Gandhian ideas throughout the world. So it's very, very nice of you, so humble of you, so nice of you, ma'am. We will look forward to you again and again, ma'am. And we are all, everybody is so thankful to you that you accepted our offer and you kindly raised this occasion and you accepted it to join our lecture, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Over to you, Manjula.
Thank you. Thank you, Karuna ma'am. Thank you for being with us and giving a valuable lecture on Gandhi. And you just told us your lecture was not so scholarly, but the thing is that what is needed in India, that we don't have to talk scholarly. We have to reach to the common man, the common people of India, because there are a lot of publication in the all over the world about Gandhi, and maximum writing on Gandhi is there, but the Gandhi is not yet reached up to the common man, and we have to spread the thoughts of Gandhi to the common man. And really salute to you that you being an American and you are at Washington, you are spreading the thoughts of Gandhi since a long time, and it is a wonderful experience. And I am thankful to Mr. Saxena ji, by whom I came to Sanjeev Bhatnagar ji. By his reference, I just got the chance to invite you in our international webinar. And I'm also thankful to Professor Pratibha Pandey, because I approached her and then I got the number of yours, and you came virtually, you came to India, and you blessed us with your lecture, and it was a very nice experience with you. And I promise you, ma'am, whenever we will do anything about Gandhi, I will just invite you virtually or in a real platform after the pandemic, COVID pandemic. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a wonderful experience with you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Pranam.
Rightly said, ma'am, that his ideologies and relevance are eternal and thus immortal. And the need of the hour is that in this 21st century, we have to seek what he sought. Pranam, ma'am, and thank you so much, Karuna, ma'am, for this valuable and enlightening talk. Suprabhat, ma'am, because since it's morning in your country, so Suprabhat, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
So now it's my sheer privilege to formally invite Dr. Frank Daunt among us. Dr. Frank Daunt is from National Cheng Kung University, Taiwan. Sir is an Indonesianist and an eminent historian of Southeast Asia. He's originally from Flanders, Belgium, and studied Indonesian in London University, Sweden, and history in Gajah Mada University, Indonesia. Sir has obtained his PhD from Yale University, USA, in Southeast Asian history. And Sir is regularly involved in multidisciplinary initiatives and is a founder and in fact editor-in-chief of Nusantara, an international journal of humanities and social sciences. His main research interest is the reaction of both elites as well as ordinary people to the Japanese occupation during World War II, especially in Indonesia, and way these events have become part of the collective memory of the era. He's also interested in the history of both world wars in Asia and the spread of ideologies such as nationalism and Islam, especially in the context of colonial empires in Asia. Now, it's my immense pleasure to welcome on board Dr. Frank, and now I request Dr. Frank to connect with us and deliver his talk on comparing ideologies of Sukarno and Mahatma Gandhiji. Welcome, Dr. Frank.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody hear me? I hope so.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh,
You're
excellent,
audible.
excellent. Okay, great. I have again prepared a PowerPoint slide. So let me try and first try to share my screen. Hopefully this works. Select.
You have to click the share present now, and then
Okay.
you just share a window. You have to open your PPT.
Okay. Okay.
Just plus first you click the present now switch, and then after you will get a small window that is share a window. Just
Present
click on that.
now. Okay. Present now. I get a little window. A window, yes. And then present your select entire screen, right?
Yes,
a window. Oh, yeah.
Oh, does it work?
Yes, sir.
Choose one of them.
Do you see my PowerPoint?
No, sir. You
Can
have
you
to
see?
first. You have to open your PPT.
Oh, okay. What about now?
Yes, sir. Now we can see, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
we can
Great.
see now.
Excellent. Excellent. And okay. First, I would like to say a big thank you to the university. But let me first say my new title. So I was thinking, as a historian of Indonesia, how can I contribute to the great list of illustrious speakers that have already presented their thoughts and ideas? And I was especially interested in hearing the talk by our speaker, Ms. Karuna, before, because I think that it is hard for people who do not speak Hindi or who are not in India to learn more about Gandhi. And I think this is something that is very high on my personal priority list. So I'm happy to join this seminar, although in a very small capacity, trying to maybe show how historically in Indonesia, Gandhi's thoughts acted as an inspiration for the Indonesian nationalists during especially the 1920s and the 1930s. So again, this is a great webinar organized by Department of History of Dr. Hari Singh Kaur University in Sagar, India. And I would like to say my thanks to all of you distinguished scholars for letting me participate in the seminar. Let me start by this, because the question is, of course, how can somebody who studies Indonesia be relevant to a seminar like this? Well, I'd like to show this newspaper article that I found during my research on Indonesia. And as you can see, I hope everybody can see this. You have this article here from a magazine called Sulu Rakyat Indonesia. And it's about Mahatma Gandhi, and the title is, as you can see, sedikit tentang hidup dan angan-angannya And if you translate that from the Indonesian, it says Mahatma Gandhi, a little bit, a little piece, sedikit means a little, about his life and his thoughts, ideas, or aspirations. Angan actually means wishful desire. So it's aspirations, what he's trying to achieve. But I do have to say that the Indonesians during the era of the 1920s and 1930s focused specifically on the example of India and the ideas of Mahatma Gandhi in as an example of how to deal with the colonial oppression. So their motivation is less spiritual and more to the side of practical politics. So basically, I'd like to mention, of course, as we know, Gandhi inspired the whole world. India during that time was seen as a powerful society, very rich, diverse, rich in tradition and history. Colonial rule, of course, still ruled supreme. And in Indonesia, Indonesian nationalism was developing, and Indonesians look to India. After World War II, Indonesia and India historically become allies. The non-aligned movement is a famous example, and you can see on the picture, I hope, you have Nehru there and Sukarno. You also have the Ghana, Egypt, and Yugoslavia represented in the picture. The historical Indianization of Indonesia is also very well documented and internalized by the Indonesians, and lots of people have done research on that. I mention only two, George Sedes, Lisita Antuisi Dandusini, and also Nicholas Johannes Krom, the Introduction to the Hindu-Javanese Art, or Hindu-Javaanse Geschiedenis in Dutch, have done a lot of this research, but many more scholars. Indianization and the influence of India in Indonesia, and actually a large part of Southeast Asia and East Asia, is very clear. Borobudur Temple in Indonesia is the largest Buddhist monument in the world. And it's ironic that this is now to be found in a country where 87% of the population is Muslim. As you can see also on the map there, not all parts of Indonesia were under Indian influence. The eastern part largely was not touched that much by Indian influence, because that part was out of the trade network to a large extent. It's not only Buddhism that comes to Indonesia, of course. Hinduism is also to a similar degree widespread all over Southeast Asia and Indonesia specifically. And you have there the Prambanan Temple. So especially during the 7th and 8th century, this influence is very strong. Nowadays, however, if you look at the map of religions there on the top right corner, large parts of Indonesia, the predominant religion is Islam, and some areas are still Christian, Protestant. There is a little bit Catholicism in the island of Flores, and also the island of East Timor. I hope people can see my cursor moving here. This part of the map is the former Portuguese colony of East Timor, now the independent country, and there you have some Catholicism. Hindu influence remains in Bali Islands, but despite the fact that the Buddhism and Hindu and Indianization is perhaps apparently a little bit reduced, actually this is not the case. This has been internalized by Indonesia, and I will show that before I move on. If you look at a historical map of where you can find the Hindu and the Buddhist temples, the red are the Buddhist temples, and the black are the Hindu temples, and you can see most of them are on central Java. This is Java Island. Most of them are on central and east Java. It has to do with the fertility of the soil. There are also some temples on Sumatra Island, mostly Buddhist actually, but there the Islamization was deeper, and also the nature of the environment created a less conducive atmosphere for that culture to take part, to take hold. However, Indonesians adopt and adapt in Indian culture to a large extent. I have put here two pictures. On the left, you see the Vishnu on the Garuda as Hindu statue. On the right, you see a statue from East Java, 11th century, where you have the king, the Erlangga dynasty king, sitting on the Garuda bird. In the center is a totally different example. There you have, in the stories of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, you have the wayang puppet of Semar, which is an Indonesian creation and is an addition to the story of the Ramayana that is often performed in Indonesia as the famous shadow puppets. There is also the shadow, the wayang wong, which is not with puppets but with humans. Wong means person in Javanese language. And this is a picture from the Royal Library of the Netherlands in the collections of the Memory of the Netherlands. This was taken in 1883. So my point that I'm trying to make here is that despite the fact that there is a layer of Islam that comes to Indonesia, India has always been there and has now become part of the culture of Indonesia. Even in the national symbol, the Pancasila, the Indonesian word for eagle is the Rajawali, but this bird is not called the eagle. This is the Garuda Pancasila. And the Garuda Pancasila again refers very clearly to that Indian influence. So basically, both Indonesia and India have experienced colonial rule, and they were and are both. There are major similarities between the two, both being exploited by the East India companies of both the Dutch and the English, and then later ruled by the British and the Dutch. And there's also the element of resistance of both the Indonesians and the Indians to that rule in their attempts to become independent countries. So what I'm interested in and what I was looking for is, to what extent did Indonesians look at the struggle of their bigger brother in the West, and how prominent is Gandhi? And as I've shown you in the first picture, it's extremely prominent as a source of inspiration. So how did Gandhian thoughts act as an inspiration? So in order to do that, I had to look at the nationalist writings of Indonesians during the 1920s and 1930s. And this is actually what I have already done when I studied in Indonesia during my MA degree. I studied the Indonesian nationalist movement, and I was interested in exactly that development of the quest for freedom. And I found so many references to India and to Gandhi, and I have recently decided to go back to that research to an extent. Here are the magazines that I have used for that research. You see on the top right corner there, Suluh Rakyat Indonesia. And Suluh in Indonesian means torch, like a guiding light of Indonesian nationalist for the population. Rakyat means the population. So the Suluh Indonesia Rakyat is Suluh Rakyat Indonesia means light of the light. The nationalists want to be a light for the people of Indonesia. Then you have Indonesia Muda, which means young Indonesia. And then you have another magazine called Indonesia itself. This one is actually written in Dutch. This one was published in the Netherlands. So two of those magazines are published in Indonesian or in Malay, the language of Malaysia, of some parts of the Sumatra as well. That was then adopted as a lingua franca for the whole of Indonesia. But the original, the other one is written by the Indonesian Association of Students in the Netherlands, and they write in Dutch. And because the fact that there is no censorship in the Netherlands, where there is censorship during the colonial era in Indonesia, it allows the Indonesians to speak more freely if they publish in the Netherlands. So because of that, many of them do. These magazines are not widespread. The number of people that have access to them are very limited, because also during that time, if you were an Indonesian, it was much safer for you to just become a civil servant. If you were in favor of the nationalist movement, you ruined your career, because nobody wants to hire a troublemaker. You cannot become a civil servant in the colonial era if you are a nationalist. So many of these leaders, like Gandhi in India, are lawyers or doctors or journalists. Going back to the three magazines that I mentioned, these three magazines come from three different organizations that all have the same goal. So in the 1920s, for Indonesian nationalist history are very important, because during that time you see a transition from ethnicity to nationality. And this is fostered by Indonesian intellectuals, first in the Netherlands, and then after their studies are completed, they return to Indonesia and spread these ideas. In Indonesia, there were very few avenues to higher education during that time, and most of the intellectuals went to the Netherlands to study. So therefore, already in 1908, you have an association called the Indisch Vereniging in Dutch. It translates into English as the Indies Association. You cannot say the Indian Association, it's the Indies Association. And this later is changed into the Indonesische Vereniging, or the Perhimpunan Indonesia, or the Indonesian Association. And this is done in 1922-1923. They publish a magazine called Indonesia Merdeka, which means Free Indonesia. And this shows an awareness of a desire to become more independent. Very shortly after that, many of those intellectuals who returned to Indonesia, they settle in Bandung and in Surabaya, two cities on Java Islands. Most of the intellectual development takes place on Java, because Java is the most densely populated island, and the outer islands are largely still very, very sparsely inhabited, and there's not much infrastructure there. Almost all schools are on Java. So therefore, the Algemene Study Club, the General Study Group, is in Bandung, founded, and they publish Indonesia Muda magazine. And the Indonesian Study Club is in Surabaya, and they publish Suluh Indonesia, and then later Suluh Rakyat Indonesia, the magazine I just mentioned. So the actions and policies of these groups were very important for the development of Indonesian nationalism, and they show clear influence of Gandhian Indian thoughts and policies. Important also is that 1 year later, you have what is very famous in Indonesia. It's called the Sumpah Pemuda, or the Indonesian Youth Pledge. And in that pledge, the youngsters of Indonesia say that they are one country, one nation, with one language. And the language is all Indonesia, the Indonesian country, the Indonesian nation, and the Indonesian language. This is an important element, because before, the problem that nationalists had is that there are so many groups and there's very big diversity, which sometimes causes quite a lot of difficulties. So the magazine I showed during the opening there was published, this article is published in 18th of March 1931, and by the group from Surabaya, the intellectuals from Surabaya, and they discuss Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, and his life and his aspirations for what he wants to achieve. He is one of the most referred to or most studied foreigners for Indonesia at that time. So of all the nationalist movements, India is the most prominent in these magazines. They also do refer to other areas. They talk about Ireland at the time, trying to struggle against the British. A little bit about China. Also, somewhat Egypt comes you see mentioned, but India is mentioned quite a lot. So for Indonesia, India is an extremely important example. And in that, Mahatma Gandhi is the predominant influence for Indonesians. How can I show that? Well, I have here on this picture, if you could see on the top right there, you see it's written in Dutch, because most of the Indonesian intellectuals at the time, they speak Dutch. The number of Indonesian intellectuals is very limited, because Dutch did not provide good education for the Indonesian elites or for the Indonesians in general. This changes a little bit in the early 20th century when they want to recruit local workers, and therefore they have to educate those workers. But in general, the Dutch do not invest or spend their money on education, which is the big disservice to the Indonesian population. And therefore also education becomes one of the important factors or the important goals of the Indonesian nationalists. The Beweging in India, as you can see there, but Cipto Mangunkusumo is one of the few who does receive education. He becomes a doctor. He becomes a doctor, one of the first doctors to be recruited on Java and to be trained on Java, and he then becomes one of the important national heroes of Indonesia of all time. Actually, there are a few of them. Just like in India, there are more than one. There are quite a few important figures. He writes the Beweging in India with introduction by engineer Sukarno, and this is of course the later president Sukarno. Sukarno at the time was one of the students or one of the followers, as you could say maybe, of Cipto Mangunkusumo. Cipto Mangunkusumo and another figure that I haven't mentioned, Cokro Aminoto, were two of the major figures that have a big influence on Sukarno. And how important is India? Well, as you can see, they write a whole book about the movement in India. And this is published in 1928 by the group in Bandung. So where the previous newspaper is an example of the group, the intellectuals from Surabaya, looking at India and looking at Gandhi for suggestions, or mostly to see what is going on there in India and how they can learn from that. You see this also happening in Bandung. The importance of Cipto Mangunkusumo, just to give you an idea, Indonesian nationalism is often said to start with a Javanese group in 1908 called Budi Utomo. It means Javanese, it means the noble endeavor. But actually, most scholars will question that, because Budi Utomo is to an extent a group of Javanese civil servants, lower ranked civil servants, that form a kind of a pressure group to defend their interests. It has little to do with the desire to create an independent nation. A different story is 1912, the Indische Partij, or the Indies Party. That group on the left side there is created by three important figures. The one sitting there, down there, is a Eurasian gentleman by the name of Douwes Dekker. He's the nephew, the the great nephew of his more famous grandfather, the great uncle, who is one of the left-leaning intellectuals who goes to Indonesia and protests against the abuses by the Dutch in the exploitation of the Dutch and even the royal dynasties as well, actually, during of the Indonesian people. And his great nephew, is still very active as an Indonesian nationalist. He later changes his name into Setia Budi, noble service or loyal service, and becomes one of the national heroes of Indonesia, actually. The second person that you see there is Suwardi Suryaningrat. Ningrat is a title, is a family name of a noble. And this gentleman there is actually one of the princes of one of the four royal houses on Java Island that originally come from the Mataram dynasty. This gentleman has later becomes the Minister for Education in the Indonesian Independent Republic. And on the right side there is that same person that writes this brochure on the movement in India. This is Cipto Mangunkusumo again. So Cipto Mangunkusumo is actually extremely important because not only is he part of Budi Utomo, as the group of one of the first movements of Indonesian proto-nationalism, and he is also directly connected to the Indische Partij. And this gentleman is then again one of the influencers or one of the counselors almost of later generation of Sukarno and his group. He is very active in the study club in Bandung. So this kind of people pay attention to India. These kind of people pay attention to India. So India and Gandhi is for them important. They do not idolize Gandhi. They do respect him very deeply, and they are interested in learning from the ideas, but they also have their own thoughts because, of course, the context is different. India and Indonesia, they're to an extent similar, but of course with a different context as well. So what are some of the conclusions that they draw? Well, of course, very basic is the movement of Indian national awakening begins far earlier than in Indonesia. From 1830, you have Ram Mohan Roy. I'm reluctant to speak about Indian history to a distinguished crowd of Indian scholars, but this is what Cipto Mangunkusumo writes. They also mention, of course, the All India Congress, 1885, the importance of Hume, Tilak, and then Gandhi as major figures. In Indonesia, as I mentioned, this starts only in 1908, if you want, or maybe perhaps more accurately, 1912. So therefore, much later. Also, they observe that Hindu-Muslim unity is quite difficult to achieve. It is achieved at times when there is opposition towards a common enemy. Now, bear in mind that when the magazines I use are published in 1931 and 1928. So what happens after that is, of course, beyond the scope of what the knowledge that the nationalists have at the time. Cipto Mangunkusumo points out protest against the division of Bengal under Curzon. He also mentions the role and importance of Gangadhar Tilak and the Khilafat movement. The Khilafat movement as a moment where Hindu and Muslim join together, and Gandhi is there at that time as the major spiritual leader, and then becomes actually spiritually inspired, as we've heard. There's so much wisdom that we can gather from Gandhi, and he is almost as it were a little bit drawn into politics. Not always successful, as we historians know, but definitely in Indonesia, the Indonesians in this magazine that I also showed, 1931, they recognize and they mention the importance and the tremendous contribution of Gandhi, which is for them that Gandhi has created an awareness of the masses of the exploitation that colonial rule caused, and he is responsible for them for the growth of the nationalist movement, the national movement. And of course, in India is in tremendously a powerful country in the sense that it has 300 million people at that time. And the Indonesian nationalists argue that people that awaken and want freedom cannot be stopped. And it's Gandhi's contribution that he has awoken those people, the Indian people. Of course, the Indonesians want to do the same in Indonesia. It's a little bit more complicated in Indonesia because the population is smaller, and so in Indonesia 1930 you have about 60 million with 40 million living on Java. And this is a little map here. I'm quite fond of maps. It shows the white part here is Java. That is a different map. This would normally be colored very much orange with a more than 200 people per square kilometer. The eastern part of Indonesia is largely, I don't want to say uninhabited, but the population of outside of Java in the census of 1930, the only reliable census we have, is 9 people per square kilometer. Whereas if you look on Java, population will be much denser. On Bali, the Hindu area, Bali and Lombok together, Lombok is more Muslim. You have 1.8 million in 1930. So Bali and Lombok, Bali especially, are very densely populated, but the other areas are not. Makassar here is also populated, but some of the areas are not. Japanese figures of 1943 state 51 million inhabitants on Java. Java population density 315 per people per square kilometer, and in the principalities, those areas of the indigenous kingdoms, the royal houses on Java, there are a few left. They're very small. Actually, even today, there is one left, the Yogyakarta House, 424 people per square kilometer. However, Indonesia is 90% rural at the time, and outside of Java, you have only that 9 people per square kilometer. India, of course, is 5 times the size, more, maybe more. So Indonesia is not a small country, but compared to India, everything is small, mostly. So what the Indonesians try to do is they try to copy or to try to learn from Gandhi, and they like to learn from India to create a popular base for their movement. And that is quite difficult for Indonesia. I think it might have to do with the fact that in India, the spiritual leadership is very important, and that Gandhi, through his philosophy, is easier, perhaps it comes into contact easier with the masses. Whereas in Indonesia, the nationalists are more approaching the masses with political thinking, and the education level for the masses is not as high, is not that high. So actually the Islamic groups have more success in reaching the masses, but they do not manage to quickly develop nationalism, in the sense that they are more looking at pan-Islamism. And actually, in the end, it is one of the great merits of Indonesia that they managed to group both the left-leaning as well as the right-leaning, as well as the religiously inspired, as well as the regionally based groups, all together against the common enemy, which is for them the Dutch. And I've mentioned here some groups, but I will skip that because I see that my time is running out. If we look specifically at Gandhian concepts, first concept I've selected here is non-cooperation. This concept is widely accepted by Indonesians in the late 1920s in their efforts to unite, despite disagreement by the Surabaya group of the nationalists. The Surabaya group is a little bit more in favor of working with the Dutch and learning from the Dutch in order to be able to take over. But the Surabaya group, in order to not break the collective, joins with the Bandung and the Dutch, the Netherlands-based group to form this unified front. After Sukarno is put in jail in 1930 exactly, the concept is largely abandoned. It's originally supported by the Indonesian Association in the Netherlands, and Indonesian writers do argue that non-cooperation was already used by the Irish in Britain before it became propagated in India in 1920s. At a later stage, the debate in Indonesia continues to be pro and contra non-cooperation. And actually, Satyagraha, the truth dimension, is largely absent in the Indonesian political discourse. However, I do want to echo what Ms. Karuna said before. Truth was also considered very much a pure value and something that was matter of factual. The Indonesians used truth to see through the political maneuvers and the political stories of the Dutch, and could very easily point out that what the Dutch were arguing was not necessarily in the interest of Indonesia. So in that sense, it is important, but it's not talked about in a political way. Swadeshi, or self-reliance, this is another value. This is widely accepted in Indonesia by both the Surabaya and the Bandung group of intellectuals. And the Surabaya group is very active, especially in attempts to provide training and, to a limited extent, management opportunities for the Indonesians. It's a little bit complicated to explain because, of course, as nationalists and therefore seen as troublemakers, they do not get too many opportunities to become managers. How do they do that? Well, they create, for instance, a bank that lends money to the poor in society, and in that way tries to empower their own group of poor Indonesians. They also try to create different courses where people can learn and get skills in order to become more intelligent, more skilled at dealing with what modernity or modern life. So the concept this concept of Swadeshi, or self-reliance, is widely accepted and continues to be important in the 1930s and beyond. There are, however, also some voices stating that it is somewhat impractical. It is impossible, for instance, to produce all the things that you need by yourself. But there is value in the fact that you develop yourself, develop your society, in that you do not depend on too much on others who can then can then manipulate you to an extent. Swaraj, or Swaraya, as it's more often referred to in Indonesia, self-rule. This is again a very strong concept that you can see in the writings of Indonesians during the 1920s and 1930s. It's already emphasized by the Indische Partij in 1912 and continues to stay the main aim of Indonesian groups in the 1920s when it re-emerges, and it continues all the way up to independence in 1945. Indonesia declares independence in 1945, but actually the Dutch only let go in 1949. There's still a struggle that continues. And to an extent, you can argue that this common enemy is also to an extent responsible for the unity of the nation. So the concept is intensely promoted in 1920s. Surabaya group of intellectuals form a major political group in Indonesia later. And in 1930s, these are all based on moving to self-rule. There is some criticism again here in the sense that the final control always remains in colonial hands. So for instance, having many councillors on city councils does not give you any major authority because the governor or the leader is always a colonial representative. Ahimsa or non-violence, this concept is not explicitly promoted in Indonesia. The nationalist movement is in general non-violent and tries to achieve its means through political activities, although the communist section of nationalist movement or the communists do not really follow that, but the nationalists do. They are non-violent, also because of large Dutch dominance and the fact that they do not manage to have that much contact with the masses. They do not have power to oppose. So you can see the concept is not promoted that much, and actually during the Japanese time, the Indonesian nationalism becomes very virulent, as it is manipulated to an extent by the Japanese to work for them. In observing the Indian nationalist movement, some Indonesian authors question how this concept can be continued if the colonial authorities in India and in Indonesia as well, or in the Netherlands, Indies, refuse to let go of their privileges. So basically, they argue that at some point there will be a confrontation if there is no admittance or allowance of the colonial power to give some power, home rule, or then independence to the colonized people. Indonesian concept, actually then, more pure Indonesian, is that there is a constant emphasis on unity and compromise. And this is actually often hard and fails to an extent occasionally, but also quite successful. And this is emphasized as well in this national Pancasila philosophy, which says Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, which is Javanese, and it means unity in diversity. And the concepts cater a little bit to all the sections of society, that they have belief in one God, a just and civilized humanity, the national, the unification, the oneness, the wholeness of Indonesia, and people guided by discussion and wisdom, and also social justice for the whole of the society. So concluding, Gandhian thoughts as an inspiration, Indonesian nationalism, and India's Gandhi, there are many similarities between India and Indonesia during the era of nationalist struggle. India is clearly ahead of Indonesia, with Indonesia then having the benefit of being able to learn from India. In the 1920s, the influence of India and Gandhi on Indonesian thinkers is extremely significant. And I do want to emphasize, for me, this is perhaps something I know because it's my research area, but these people that I mentioned, those intellectuals from the Netherlands, the Indonesians in the Netherlands, of course, the group in Surabaya and the group in Bandung, those are the nationalist leaders that emerged after the war. So there are no others. There are some others that are national, that are communist. There are some others that are Islamic. But these groups that I've talked about now, that study Gandhi, that study India, or that study India to learn from it, these are the leaders for the future of Indonesia. So therefore, the fact that these groups take Gandhi and India so significantly, and consider India and Gandhi so significant, says a lot. It says a lot. It means that Gandhi and India are very important because the thoughts and concepts of Gandhi and the thoughts and the concepts also promoted by Gandhi are to a large extent widely found and adopted in Indonesia at the time, in the political struggle of the Indonesians, and these have made Gandhi. It's Gandhi who has made these ideas popular all over the world. So the influence of Gandhi extends beyond only India. During the pre-independence era, Indonesian nationalists critically analyzed Gandhian thoughts, and they recognized the tremendous contribution of Gandhi in mobilizing the Indian masses, something that they themselves constantly struggle with. So the Indonesia today is based on the efforts of the Indonesian nationalists during the colonial era, and their thinking is of course influenced to a large extent by ideas and concepts that were propagated and thought of by Gandhi and Indonesian nationalists as well. So I would like to end my talk here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Frank Don has delivered his talk on Gandhian thoughts as inspiration, Indonesian nationalism, and India's Gandhi. Dr. Frank Don, you have talked on how Gandhiji inspired the world. And with the fact, we must say that Gandhiji has left a humongous and everlasting impression on everyone, pan-India and all around the world, in fact. So with your visual presentation, we definitely construed how Gandhiji has influenced Indonesia and Indonesians. So yours was the correlational talk from ancient times to nationalistic era and much more. Thank you very much, sir, for sparing us time from your busy schedule. Thank you, sir. Namaste, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Frank. This is a wonderful experience to know the correlation of India and Indonesia, and correlating the relation of Gandhi and Sukarno, and many more things. We have learned a lot from this lecture, and really you have enlightened us, and it was a privilege for us that you have joined us, and you have accepted our request. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, participants, we are at the verge of end of this international webinar on revisiting Gandhian thoughts in 21st century. And for concluding remarks and formal thanks, I request Dr. Pankaj Singh, sir, the organizer of this webinar, to come forward and present his vote of thanks to the revered speakers and participants. Over to you, sir.